Hey, greetings DIYers around the world. You're seeing our very tiny backyard, which is mostly a giant mud pit. It's ugly, it's unsightly, and there's a little bit of grass growing there, but for the most part, it's just a dead zone. As I zoom in here, it's, some dead grasses, some dead weeds. It needs help. This section here, I tried to pour some decomposed granite on top of the mud, and the mud just swallowed it up. So now I'm going to try a ground cover called Kurapia. But before I show how I got that going, I wanted to show you the last ground cover idea that I had, which was dwarf carpet of stars. Now, after a year of intense Southern California inland heat, this is what I wound up with. Dwarf carpet of death, which I was told would be hardy, but it's not. Joke was on me. And yes, I watered it regularly, and yes, I kept foot traffic and dog traffic off the dwarf carpet of stars. Didn't work. Anyway, here's the mud pit you saw earlier. Here's the initial stages of prep for the Kurapia. I fenced off this little section to keep Ryder the dog away from new Kurapia plugs that I'm going to plant in this section here. I'm going to treat this area with Spectracide to kill off any remaining weeds. All right, I waited at least 3 weeks before planting the Kurapia plugs. I wanted to give the Spectracide time to just kind of fade away. Here's that section with a fresh coat of high-grade topsoil, and here's that same section with the freshly installed Kurapia plugs. A flat comes with 72 plugs. I put 2 dozen into this section, so I had plenty left over for other areas of the lawn. At 3.5 weeks, it doesn't look like there's a lot of growth yet. However, you can see this spot does get its share of sunlight, which Kurapia needs in order to thrive. Here's the 5-week shot, and you can start to see that there's growth emerging from these plugs. There's also growth around them in the form of grass and weeds. I got to clear those out. And here's the 6-week shot, and you can see I removed a lot of the grass that was kind of forming a perimeter around this Kurapia, but you can also see that these former plugs are really starting to grow. They're really starting to expand a little bit. At this stage, I had my sprinklers set for 3 minutes every other day, so 3 minutes every 48 hours is what these Kurapia plants were receiving, and that seemed to be sufficient for these newer plants. Eventually, you need to tone down the watering as they mature. Now, here's a plug that I planted outside of the rider-free zone, and here's a divot that Ryder created that crushed a former Kurapia plant. You can see he's no longer with us, but these guys are safe. Here's an example of one that was planted outside of the safe zone. And here's Kurapia's biggest nemesis to its right. So lesson learned, keep dog traffic off of new Kurapia plugs. On the other hand, even though it's designed to be drought tolerant, Kurapia does seem to fare well in heavy weather conditions. Here's a shot of that area about 2 weeks into planting, and I didn't know that a deluge would hit us here in Southern California, but it did. So much so that you can see that a lot of my Kurapia is completely submerged, completely underwater. You can barely see it. There's a plug somewhere in there. Anyway, this Kurapia recovered. There's one, and there's another, and outside is, yep, there's that one I showed earlier. All these guys came through the deluge just fine. I kept the sprinklers off for a good week and a half after this rainstorm. At the 7-week mark after I first planted the plugs, you can see these plants have really started to take off. They're starting to grow towards each other, which of course is a good thing. That's what we want. And they're even starting to sprout little tiny white flowers. Kurapia is known for that. It will sprout little tiny flowers, and those flowers can attract pollinators, butterflies and bees. That's a good thing normally. You may not want bees around your pets, but just be aware that that could be an issue. Here we go, 2 months after planting, and this is where I started to realize in certain situations Kurapia may not be the way to go. Grass comes in a lot faster, and Kurapia seems to take a little bit longer to really spread out, to really cover the ground. I want to be very clear here and mention that I went the extra mile to make sure this Kurapia planting was successful. I mean, I used a manual tiller to break up the soil before planting these plugs. I put down spectricide to kill all the weeds. I waited a couple of weeks before planting the plugs to let the spectricide kind of dilute, kind of evaporate. I believe I went above and beyond to make sure these plants had all kinds of chances to really grow, to really succeed. And as you can see from this still shot, initially it did succeed. You can see here I've got what I believe was a pretty successful planting of Kurapia plugs. They came in really nicely. They covered the area that I wanted them to cover really nicely. And for a while I even had a nice spot to throw the ball around with Ryder the dog. And he's not digging these plants up. He's not rooting through them. We're just tossing a tennis ball around. The folks at Kurapiaville assured me, or assured anybody who buys this stuff, that it's pet friendly. So as you can see, we're just tossing a ball around. We're not destroying the Kurapia. I mean, it is meant to be a ground cover. It's meant to put up with a little bit of traffic. At this point, I should mention that Kurapia is not available through normal channels. You can't find it at your local nursery. You can't get it at the big box home improvement stores. Apparently, it's a patented product that doesn't generate seeds, and the producer keeps it that way and essentially has a monopoly on Kurapia. That's a strike against it. This stuff is not easy to get a hold of. You can only order it online, and it's expensive. At the time I made this video, a flat of Kurapia, which contains 72 plugs, runs about $200. You can get other ground covers, more readily available ground covers, for a lot less. Anyway, here's my Kurapia planting about 2 or 3 months after those shots you saw with our dog Ryder. As you can see, it's a dead zone. I don't know why. I don't know if some sort of disease got into this stuff, but apparently Kurapia is disease resistant. But it's very clear that my planting didn't work out, and that's despite all the work, all the maintenance I took to make sure that this wouldn't happen. So needless to say, I'm not happy. This was a fail. This was a giant bust. I'm actually pretty ticked because so much time and effort went into this. Full disclosure, I had every intention of posting this video as a positive how-to on planting Kurapia until the majority of it died off. I didn't expect this video to turn into a negative assessment of Kurapia, but that's what I ended up with. So let's review. On the left, you'll see the before Kurapia shot, the shot that came early in this video. And of course, on the right is the after Kurapia shot. Just a bunch of dead Kurapia. Yeah, looks beautiful. I would argue that the before shot is actually better. So anyway, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just plant regular old, good old-fashioned, boring grass seed in the same spot. After 2 attempts at ground covers, I'm ready to try something tried and true. Anyway, I hope this video helps you in your ground cover quest. If it does, please give me a subscribe. I would appreciate it, and thanks for watching.